My name is Liam Carter, and 17 days ago, I won $7.5 million in the state lottery. The very first thought that exploded in my mind, even before the screaming excitement, was a cold, hard decision. I would not tell a single soul. Not my parents, not my brother, not my closest friends. This secret was mine alone to keep. I cashed the ticket through a legal trust that hid my name. I met with financial planners. I saw the life-changing number appear in a brand new investment account, and I said nothing. I went to my same job, I drove my same beat-up car, and I wore my same old jeans. But this secret, this massive, earth-shattering truth that I was carrying around every single second, started to change me. It made me see every interaction with the people I loved in a completely different light. I started to wonder, if the tables were turned, if I was the one who had nothing, who would actually be there for me? So I did something that might sound cruel. I devised a test. I decided to tell my family that I was completely broke, desperate, and that I needed to borrow $5,000 to keep my life from falling apart. And what happened next? Well, it showed me exactly who they truly were. Before I tell you the heartbreaking and shocking results of that test, I want to know something from you. Let me know where you are right now watching my story from in the comments below. I read every single one. The moment it happened was a Tuesday. It was my day off, and honestly, it had been a pretty miserable one. I'd spent the morning on the phone arguing with my insurance company about a bill I was sure I'd already paid, and the afternoon scrubbing my bathroom because I couldn't afford to hire a cleaner. My life felt like a constant, exhausting loop of just barely keeping my head above water. I was a 32-year-old line cook at a decent but not famous restaurant, and my biggest financial goal was saving enough to get my car's transmission fixed before the rainy season started. That evening, just before I was about to microwave some leftovers for dinner, I remembered the lottery ticket I bought on a whim 2 days prior. It was a silly habit, a $10 fantasy I allowed myself every week. My family loved to make fun of me for it. My dad called it a tax on the mathematically challenged. My older brother Mark always said, "You might as well just light that cash on fire, Liam. You'd get more warmth from it." I dug the crumpled ticket out of the pocket of my jeans, which were sitting in a pile on my bedroom floor. I grabbed my laptop, Googled the winning numbers from the Saturday night draw, and started to idly check them off. The first number matched. I shrugged. That happens sometimes. The second number matched. A small, familiar flicker of hope sparked in my chest, the kind that gets extinguished a second later. I leaned in closer to the screen. The third number matched. My breath hitched. No way. I whispered to my empty studio apartment. The fourth number matched. I was standing up now, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The fifth number matched. I was holding my breath, my hands beginning to shake so violently, I could barely hold the tiny piece of paper. I looked back at the screen for the final number. I looked down at my ticket. I looked back at the screen. They were identical. A sound escaped my mouth that I didn't even recognize. A choked gasp mixed with a disbelieving laugh. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the springs groaning in protest. I checked again, and again, and a fourth time, reading the numbers out loud, my voice trembling. 21, 4, 17, 38, 42, 11. It was real. I was the sole winner of a $7.5 million jackpot. After taxes, it would be a little over $4 million. $4 million. The number was so vast, so abstract, it didn't even feel real. My mind short-circuited. I thought about the insurance bill. I could pay it 1,000 times over. I thought about my car. I could buy a fleet of new cars. I thought about my apartment, with its leaky faucet and the neighbor who played loud music at 3 in the morning. I could buy a house, a real house, with a yard, maybe even a view. The initial pure, unadulterated joy lasted for about 10 minutes. I was pacing around my tiny apartment, laughing, crying, making plans that were getting bigger and wilder by the second. I was going to travel the world. I was going to quit my job and go to culinary school in France. I was going to be free. And then, like a bucket of ice-cold water being dumped over my head, the reality of my family crashed down on me. My parents, who were comfortably middle class but always complaining about being cash poor because of their expensive hobbies. My brother Mark, who had a seemingly endless talent for getting into financial scrapes, and an even more endless talent for guilting me into helping him out. Just 6 months ago, I'd lent him $1,500 to cover his share of the rent. Money I'd been scrimping and saving for months to put into a pathetic little emergency fund. I'd yet to see a dime of it back, and whenever I brought it up, he'd get defensive and say, "I'm good for it, Liam. Don't be so uptight. You're worse than Dad." I thought about my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, who had married well and never missed an opportunity to remind us all of her good taste and our lack of it. I thought about my cousins, my friends, and a deep cold dread began to mix with the euphoria. This money wouldn't be a blessing for me. It would be a target. I would become the family bank, the personal ATM. Every problem would become my problem. Every bad decision would become my responsibility to fix. The guilt trips, the manipulations, the constant draining requests, they would never end. I'd seen it happen before. I went online and started frantically searching for stories of lottery winners. What I found was a horror show. Families torn apart by greed. Lives destroyed by newfound friends and long-lost relatives. Winners who were bankrupt and more miserable than they were before they won. One article had a headline that seared itself into my brain. "Winning the lottery is the quickest way to lose everything you care about." That's when I made the decision. Sitting on my bed, the winning ticket clutched in my sweaty hand, I made a vow to myself. I would tell no one. Absolutely no one. I would claim this money in secret. I would get my finances in order with professionals. And I would figure out what this new life meant for me before I let anyone else try to figure it out for me. The first and most important step was to protect my identity. I spent the rest of that night and the entire next day researching online. I learned that in my state, I could claim a prize through a legal entity like a trust to keep my name out of the public record. That Monday, I called in sick to work, something I almost never did, and I went to see a lawyer named Mrs. Davina Sterling, who specialized in wealth management. Walking into her sleek, high-rise office in my worn-out sneakers and a jacket I'd owned since college, I felt like an imposter, a fraud. But Mrs. Sterling didn't bat an eye. When I placed the ticket on her enormous mahogany desk, her eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before she slipped back into perfect professionalism. "I see," she said calmly. "You've come to the right place. Let's talk about how we keep this quiet." Life before that ticket was fine. It was normal. It was the same grind that millions of people go through every single day, but it was my grind. I worked the lunch and dinner rush at a busy downtown pub called the Oak Barrel. I was good at my job. I could sear a dozen steaks all to perfect temperature without breaking a sweat, but it was hard, hot, and thankless work. My feet ached constantly, my arms were a roadmap of small burns, and I smelled like fry oil no matter how many showers I took. I made just enough to cover the rent on my cramped studio, keep my 10-year-old Honda Civic, affectionately named the Death Trap, vaguely operational, and pay my utilities. There was never anything left over. My version of a vacation was having 2 days off in a row. Every single month was a carefully orchestrated ballet of financial anxiety. I knew exactly which day each bill was due, which grocery store had the best markdowns on meat about to hit its sell-by date, and how to stretch a single cup of coffee into 2 by adding extra hot water. I'd lie in bed at night and do the math in my head over and over. Rent, $1,200. Car insurance, $185. Phone, $95. Utilities, usually around $150. The numbers would swirl behind my eyes. A constant low-level hum of stress that was just part of my existence. An unexpected $100 expense, like a new tire or a trip to the urgent care, could completely derail me for months. I was treading water and I was so tired. And my family, well, they were the reason I was always so drained financially and emotionally. To them, I was reliable, steady Liam, which was just a nice way of saying I was their backup plan. Let's start with my parents, Robert and Susan. Dad retired early from his mid-level management job and now spends most of his time on the golf course, complaining about his pension not being what he'd hoped. Mom never worked, and she's perfected the art of living just a little beyond their means. Their house is always getting some kind of upgrade. A new patio, a kitchen refresh, and yet there was always a tight month. I can't tell you how many times my phone would ring, and it would be my mom's sweet, slightly worried voice. "Liam, honey, you know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But the property taxes are due and it just caught us by surprise. Could we borrow $1,500? Just until the end of the month, I promise." The end of the month would come and go. I'd be late on my own credit card payment because I'd helped them out. And when I gently bring it up, my dad would get defensive. Son, we're good for it. You know that. Don't nickel and dime us. They owed me over $8,000. It had become a ghost in every conversation we had. Then there's my older brother, Mark. Oh, Mark, the golden child who could never quite get his gold to shine. He's a concept man, always on the verge of the next big thing that never materializes. He's been a real estate agent, a life coach, a cryptocurrency guru, and most recently, an influencer focused on mindful entrepreneurship. It was all a fancy way of saying he didn't have a steady job, and every new venture required seed money. Liam, bro, this is it. This is the one, he'd say, his voice bursting with manic energy. I just need $2,000 for a professional camera and a lighting setup. I'll pay you back double once the brand deals start rolling in. You believe in me, right? And I did. I always did. Because he's my brother. I'd send him the money I'd saved for a new mattress. Sleeping on a sagging, broken-down spring coil for another year. The camera would arrive. He'd post 3 videos. Then silence. The next time I'd hear from him, he'd have a new idea and a new emergency. And the old debt would be forgotten, a relic of a past failure he didn't want to dwell on. The worst was last year. He showed up at my apartment at midnight looking wrecked. He said he was in trouble, that he owed some people money, bad people, and he needed $5,000 cash to make it right. He was scared. I was terrified for him. I didn't have $5,000. So what did I do? I did the most stupid, desperate thing I've ever done. I took out a high-interest payday loan. The kind with terms so predatory it makes me sick to think about it even now. I gave him the cash. He hugged me, cried, promised me he was going to turn his life around. A week later, I saw a post on Instagram. He was in Vegas, grinning next to a sports car he'd apparently rented for the weekend. When I called him furious, he laughed it off. Liam, relax. I made a lucky bet at the blackjack table and squared everything away. I'll get you back soon, don't worry. He never did. I spent the next 14 months eating ramen noodles and working double shifts to pay off that loan. The interest piling up like a mountain on my back. That debt, that feeling of being so utterly used and foolish, it changed something in me. I built a wall. And it was that wall that made me decide, the second I saw those winning lottery numbers, that no one could ever know. They had shown me who they were when I had nothing to give but my own sacrifice. I couldn't imagine what they would become if they knew I had millions. That night, after the initial shock wore off, the panic set in. It was a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and slithered up my spine. The ticket, this flimsy piece of paper that was now the most valuable thing I had ever touched, felt like it was burning a hole through my kitchen table. I couldn't stop looking at it. I put it in a book, then took it out and hid it in a cereal box. Then I took it out of the cereal box and just held it, my hands still shaking. I was alone in my apartment, but I felt like the walls had ears. Every creak of the floorboards from the apartment above sounded like a footstep. Every car that drove by slowly outside made my heart leap into my throat. I was a sitting duck. I had a target on my back and I was the only one who could see it. The sheer weight of it was paralyzing. $7.5 million. It wasn't just a number anymore. It was a responsibility. It was a threat. I did the only thing I could think to do. I opened my laptop and I started to search. What to do after winning the lottery? Biggest lottery winner mistakes. I fell down a rabbit hole of the most horrifying cautionary tales you could ever imagine. I read about Abraham Shakespeare, a man who won $30 million and was murdered by someone who wanted his money. I read about Jack Whitaker, a West Virginia man who won $315 million and was hounded by lawsuits, thefts, and personal tragedies, his life becoming a public spectacle of misery. I read about Evelyn Adams, who won the lottery not once, but twice, and ended up broke and living in a trailer, giving away millions to greedy relatives and bad investments. But the stories that hit closest to home weren't about murder or bankruptcy. They were about the slow, soul-crushing erosion of a person's life by the people who were supposed to love them. Winners described being hounded day and night by long-lost cousins, childhood friends, and charities they'd never heard of. Their inboxes flooded with sob stories and investment opportunities. Their families turned into packs of wolves, circling and demanding their share, accusing them of greed if they hesitated. One woman wrote about how her sister presented her with a bill for emotional support over the years, demanding payment now that she had the means. Another winner talked about how his own parents sued him, claiming the ticket was a family purchase. I read about the vultures, the financial advisors who pushed bad deals, the lawyers who siphoned off fees, the hangers-on who just wanted a free ride. I read comment sections on these articles and they were even worse. People openly fantasizing about what they would do if their relative won, listing the cars and houses they would demand. The sheer, naked entitlement from complete strangers was terrifying. I saw my own family in every single one of those comments. I saw my brother Mark drawing up a list of luxury sports cars. I saw my parents planning a new, much larger house and putting my name on the mortgage. I saw my Aunt Carol asking for a small loan to start a boutique. I must have read for 4 hours straight. The blue light of the screen, the only thing illuminating my dark apartment. My excitement had completely curdled into pure, unadulterated fear. This money wasn't a ticket to freedom. It was a curse waiting to happen. It was a bomb that would blow up every relationship I had. It would turn me into a paranoid, miserable recluse, constantly worried about who was after my money. The person I was, Liam the line cook, the reliable brother, the slightly broke friend, would be erased and replaced by Liam the lottery winner. That would be my entire identity, and everyone would want a piece of that new person. As the sun began to rise, painting my shabby apartment in a weak gray light, I made my decision. It wasn't a happy one. It was a survival instinct. I closed my laptop, picked up the ticket, and held it tight in my fist. I would claim this money, but I would tell absolutely no one. Not my parents, not my brother, not my best friend from work. Not yet, maybe not ever. This secret would be mine to carry. It would be my shield. I would become a ghost, a silent millionaire living in a line cook's life, until I could figure out how to navigate this new reality without being devoured by it. The money was real, but so was the danger. And for the first time in my life, I decided that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. The first thing I did Monday morning was call the Oak Barrel. I faked the most pathetic, raspy cough I could manage and told my manager I had a fever and couldn't come in. I'd never called in sick for something that wasn't true, and my stomach was in knots. But this was different. This was an emergency. My next call was to the law office of Davina Sterling. Her assistant answered, her voice crisp and efficient. I stumbled over my words, something about needing to discuss a time-sensitive financial matter. I must have sounded like a crazy person, but they squeezed me in for a 2 p.m. appointment. The hours until then were agony. I put the ticket in a Ziploc bag and tucked it inside an old, boring-looking paperback novel on my shelf. I paced. I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus. I just stared at the clock, watching the minutes drag by. When it was finally time to go, I put on the only semi-professional clothes I owned. A pair of dark jeans and a button-down shirt that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. Driving to her downtown office in my rattling Civic, surrounded by sleek luxury cars, I felt like an imposter, a fraud about to be exposed. What if she took one look at me and called security? Her office was on the 20th floor. Everything was glass and dark, polished wood. The air smelled like expensive coffee and quiet money. I sat in the waiting room, my knees bouncing up and down, clutching the paperback in my sweaty hands. I probably looked like I was there for a bankruptcy consultation. When her assistant called my name, I jumped. Miss Sterling's office was huge, with a breathtaking view of the city. She herself was probably in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice even in professional. "What can I help you with today?" I didn't know how to say it gracefully. There was no smooth way to do it. So I just opened the book, took out the Ziploc bag, and slid the ticket across the immense, shiny surface of her desk. Her expression didn't change. No gasp, no white eyes. She simply picked up the bag, examined the ticket inside, then pulled up the winning numbers on her computer screen with a few clicks of her keyboard. She compared them, her eyes flicking back and forth. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity, she looked back at me. "I see," she said, her tone completely unchanged. "You've come to the right place." The relief that washed over me was so powerful I thought I might pass out. She didn't think I was a fraud. She didn't call security. She just got to work. For the next hour, she laid out the plan. In our state, I could claim the prize through a limited liability company and LLC to keep my name out of the public record. She would be the one to handle the physical claiming process. We would establish a blind trust, which would ultimately be the owner of the funds. This created layers of privacy, making it incredibly difficult for anyone to connect the winning ticket to Liam Carter. The line cook. She talked about immediate steps, paying the hefty state and federal taxes up front to avoid a nightmare later. She stressed the importance of a team, a separate financial advisor to handle investments, an accountant specifically for high-net-worth individuals. She warned me about the barrage of requests that would come from charities, investors, and strangers the second the win was publicly announced, even without my name, and gave me a script for saying no. Then she paused and looked at me directly, her gaze intense. "Mr. Carter, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "The single biggest mistake people in your situation make is telling too many people, too quickly. They feel a surge of generosity or guilt or excitement, and they share the news with family and friends. It is, without exception, a catastrophic error." I nodded, my throat dry. "I don't plan on telling anyone." "Good," she said, a hint of approval in her voice. "Because once that genie is out of the bottle, you cannot put it back. It changes every dynamic, every relationship, forever. The people who love you will see a resource. The people who like you will see an opportunity. And the people who barely know you will see a mark. Your life as you know it will be over." Hearing her say it so bluntly, with the cold, hard logic of someone who had seen it all before, cemented my decision. This wasn't me being paranoid or selfish. This was standard operating procedure for surviving a windfall. I signed a mountain of paperwork. I left her office with a business card for a financial advisor named Michael Reed, and a list of tasks that felt both overwhelming and surreal. Set up a new P.O. box. Establish a new private email address. Do not deposit any large sums into your existing bank account. Walking back to my car, the ticket was still physically with me, but the crushing weight of it was gone. It was now in the hands of a professional. The money was no longer a terrifying secret. It was a project I was determined to manage correctly. For the first time since those numbers matched, I felt like I could breathe. I had a plan, and step one was to tell no one. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange, silent bubble. I went back to work at the Oak Barrel. I chopped onions, I grilled burgers, I wiped down the same sticky counters I'd been wiping for years. But everything felt different. I was playing a part, and I was terrifyingly aware that I was the only one on set who knew it was a play. The noise of the kitchen, the yelling of orders, the heat from the grill. It all felt distant, like I was watching it on a television screen. My body went through the motions on autopilot, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in a bank account I couldn't openly access. It was in investment portfolios that were being built for a future I couldn't yet imagine. Every time my phone buzzed, a jolt of fear would shoot through me. Had someone found out? Did they know? The guilt was the worst part. My friend and fellow cook Javier was complaining about his car breaking down again, worrying about how he was going to afford the repairs to get to his second job. The old me would have nodded along, shared his stress, maybe even offered to cover a shift for him. The new me, the secret millionaire me, just stood there, my mouth feeling like it was full of sand. I couldn't offer to help. I couldn't even genuinely commiserate. How could I? I could have written him a check for a brand new car and not even felt it. My sympathy felt like a lie. Everything felt like a lie. I'd go home to my cramped, noisy apartment and just sit on my futon, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. The contrast between the life I was living and the life I could be living was giving me whiplash. I had the means to walk out of that kitchen forever. I could buy a quiet house somewhere with a real kitchen and cook for the joy of it, not because my rent depended on it. But I was stuck here in this purgatory of my own making, because I was too afraid of what would happen if I left. The fear of my family's reaction was a constant, gnawing anxiety. I knew them. I knew how they operated. Their sense of entitlement was a bottomless pit. If I suddenly quit my job, if I moved, if I even bought a new pair of shoes that looked too expensive, the questions would start. The suspicions would grow. They would sniff out the change in my circumstances like bloodhounds. I couldn't just start my new life. I had to find a way to understand the minefield I was stepping into first. The idea didn't come in a lightning bolt of inspiration. It grew slowly, taking root in the fertile soil of my paranoia and my painful history with them. I was on my break, scrolling through my phone, looking at the text from my brother that I'd been ignoring. Another "can you spot me $100" message. And it hit me. It was always them asking me. It was always them in the crisis with their hands out. What would happen if it was me? What would happen if the reliable one, the steady one, suddenly wasn't so reliable anymore? The thought was terrifying. And then it was exhilarating. It was the only way. I couldn't just wonder. I couldn't just worry. I had to know. I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes who they really were when the shoe was on the other foot, when there was nothing in it for them, when giving meant actual sacrifice, not just tapping into the family ATM. That night, lying in bed, I crafted the story. It had to be believable. It had to be a genuine crisis, but not so catastrophic that it would seem suspiciously dramatic. I settled on losing my job. It was clean, simple, and something that could happen to anyone. The Oak Barrel was a small business. It wouldn't be a stretch to say it had suddenly shut down. I'd say the owner had just gathered us all together and said he was closing up, effective immediately. No severance, no final paycheck because things were so messy. The amount was crucial. It had to be significant enough to be a real stretch for them, but not so huge that they could immediately write it off as impossible. $5,000. It was enough to cover 2 months of my rent, with a little left over for bills. It was a real tangible and urgent need. This wasn't about being cruel. This wasn't about revenge. This was about survival. I needed a map of my own relationships. I needed to know who I could trust with the truth, if anyone. I needed to see who would see me, Liam, their brother, their son, and not just a dollar sign. The experiment was born from a place of deep hurt and profound self-preservation. It was the only way I could think to step out of the shadows and into my new life without getting blindsided. I had to know who would really be there to catch me if I fell. I sat at my small kitchen table with a notepad, the same one I use for grocery lists and budgeting. Now, I was using it to plan the most emotionally charged experiment of my life. I wrote down every name: Mom, Dad, Mark. I had to be methodical. I had to control the variables. I decided to contact them all within a 36-hour window. That way, the story would be consistent, and they wouldn't have too much time to compare notes and craft a unified response before I'd reached out to everyone. The order mattered. I would start with my parents. Their reaction would set the tone. Then I'd tell Mark. His response would be the most volatile and unpredictable. I'd leave my Aunt Carol for last, almost as a form of emotional palate cleanser. A tiny beacon of hope I was desperately clinging to. As I wrote each name, I wrote my prediction next to it. This was my scorecard. This was what I truly believed would happen, based on a lifetime of evidence. Mom. My prediction was that she would perform concern. She'd be all sympathy and worry, but it would quickly morph into a problem for someone else to solve. She'd say she had to talk to my dad first, and then the answer would be a regretful, wallet-closed no. She might offer a few $100s as a consolation prize, a token to alleviate her own guilt more than my actual problem. Dad, he wouldn't even get to the question of money. He'd immediately launch into a lecture. This would be a teachable moment. He'd grill me on my life choices, my career path, my lack of savings. The request for money would just be proof of every failing he'd ever suspected I had. The answer would be a firm, disappointed no, wrapped in a half-hour sermon on financial responsibility. Mark. This one was easy. My brother would disappear. He'd give a dramatic, sympathetic text response initially. OMG bro, that's awful. But the second I mentioned the 5,000, the text would stop. Radio silence. He'd become a ghost, because the one thing he cannot handle is being on the receiving end of a request. He'd see it as an attack, an inconvenience, and he'd vanish until he thought it was safe to come out and ask for something again. Aunt Carol. She was the wild card, the one person I had a flicker of hope for. She wasn't rich. She worked as a paralegal and lived a quiet, modest life. But she was also the only one who had ever sent me money for no reason. A $20 bill and a birthday card with a note that said, for something fun. My prediction was that she wouldn't have 5,000, but she would offer what she could. Maybe 500. maybe just a place to stay. But she would offer something tangible, without judgment or lecture. She was my control group for basic human decency. The plan was set. I rehearsed my lines in the mirror, trying to sound stressed but not hysterical, desperate but not pathetic. I was about to break my own life in their eyes, just to see if anyone would try to help me put it back together. I picked up my phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was time to start the test. I called my mom first. The performance began. I laid out the story. The sudden closure, the lost paycheck, the looming rent. She made all the right noises. Oh, honey, no. And those awful people. Then I made the ask. The line went quiet for a beat too long. Oh, Liam, you know things have been so tight since your father retired. The country club dues just hit, and the new patio furniture. Let me talk to your father, but I just don't know. She didn't even wait to talk to him. She'd already given the answer. It was a soft, sympathetic no, but a no all the same. My dad was next. I met him for a coffee, thinking a public place might temper him. It didn't. Just as predicted, he didn't even let me finish. Lose your job? Well, that's what happens in the service industry. No stability. I told you to get into trades. I told you to look into that HVAC program. For 20 minutes, he dissected my entire career path. When he finally circled back to the money, he shook his head. Son, your mother and I are on a fixed income. We can't be bailing you out of poor decisions. This is a chance for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. He slapped a 20 on the table for the coffee. Get your resume together. Then came Mark. I sent him a carefully worded text. His response was immediate. No way. That's so messed up, dude. I waited. Then I sent the follow-up. Yeah, it's bad. I'm pretty desperate. Any chance you could help me out? I need like $5K to cover rent. The 3 little dots appeared. They bounced for a minute. Then they disappeared. Nothing. An hour later I sent her. Nothing. I called. It went straight to voicemail. He had, as predicted, ghosted me the second I needed something. The gossip mill started grinding almost instantly. My phone buzzed later that evening. It was my dad. Your mother tells me you're asking everyone for money. Is that true? His voice was cold. I'm disappointed, Liam. Instead of solving your problem, you're panicking and begging. That's not how we raised you. My mom texted. I heard you ask Mark too? Honey, you know he doesn't have any money. You're just putting pressure on everyone. The final nail in the coffin was a text from my brother the next day. Not to me, but in our family group chat that I was still in. He was complaining about someone trying to borrow money from him. Some people just have no shame, he wrote, always looking for a handout instead of just getting their life together. The hypocrisy was so breathtaking, so utterly shameless, that I actually laughed out loud, a sharp, bitter sound in my empty apartment. The experiment was over. The results were in. And they were exactly what I had feared they would be. I had my proof. It was the most painful proof I had ever received. 2 days after the radio silence from my immediate family, my phone rang. It was Aunt Carol. Her voice was soft, laced with a concern that felt entirely different from my mother's performative worry. Liam, honey, your mom called me. She said you've hit a bit of a rough patch. Are you okay? I launched into my rehearsed story, my voice cracking with a real emotion I didn't have to fake, the pain of the previous rejections. I mentioned the $5,000, bracing for another excuse. She didn't hesitate. Let's have lunch tomorrow. My treat. We'll figure this out. We met at a small, quiet cafe. She listened, really listened, as I told my tale, her kind eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she didn't sigh or lecture. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. This isn't the full amount, she said, pushing it across the table. But it's $3,200. It should cover your rent and then some. Please take it. I was stunned. Aunt Carol, I can't. This is too much. Nonsense, she said firmly. Family is family. And I want you to know my sofa is always free if you need a place to land. It's not much, but it's a roof. I took the envelope, my hand trembling, overwhelmed by a generosity that felt alien after the past few days. It was only later, through a conversation with a talkative cousin, that I discovered the truth. That 3,200 was almost every penny of her savings. She'd been quietly draining it to pay for physical therapy for a chronic back injury she'd been hiding from everyone. Terrified of the medical debt, she had given me her safety net without a second thought. A week later, I invited her to my apartment. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. "Aunt Carol," I started, my voice thick, "I need to confess, I didn't lose my job. The oak barrel is fine. I laid out the entire scheme, the lottery win, the fear, the terrible test. I waited for the hurt, the anger, the betrayal." She was quiet for a long moment, simply sipping her tea. Then she looked at me, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a deep, profound sadness. "Oh, Liam," she whispered, "you must have been so lonely carrying all that, and so hurt by everyone to feel you needed to do that." Her understanding shattered me. I started to cry, great heaving sobs of relief and guilt. Then I told her the rest. The money, it was $7.5 million. I'm a millionaire. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't gasp or ask for a thing. She just smiled, a small, wise smile. "I see," she said. "So the test was real for you. You needed to know who you could trust." I nodded. She reached over and took my hand. "Money is a powerful thing, Liam. It doesn't change people. It just removes the filters. It shows you exactly who they've always been deep down when the masks come off. Greedy people become monstrous. Kind people," she gestured to herself with a gentle laugh, "well, they just get to be kind without a budget." I told her everything then. About the trust, the investments, the paralyzing fear. I told her I wanted to pay her back 10 times over. I wanted to buy her a house, pay for the best doctors, whatever she wanted. She refused. Flatly. "I don't want your money, Liam. I gave you that money because I thought you needed it. Getting a reward for that feels wrong." It took me a month of arguing, of pleading, to finally get her to accept a compromise. I set up a trust to cover all her medical expenses for life, and bought a beautiful, accessible single-level home for her, putting it in her name. I told her it was the only way I could ever sleep at night. Finally, she relented, tears in her eyes. A year later, my life is unrecognizable. I finally quit my job, telling everyone I'd gotten a remote, freelance bookkeeping gig that paid surprisingly well. I moved into a beautiful modern apartment. But the best part is, Aunt Carol lives just 10 minutes away. We have dinner every week. I used the bulk of the money to start a small foundation that offers emergency grants to service industry workers facing sudden crises. Medical bills, evictions, car repairs. It's named the Caro Grant. My relationship with my parents and brother is peaceful. Distant but peaceful. They believe my freelance story. They're vaguely proud of my non-profit work, though they never asked for details. The constant requests for money have stopped. The dynamic has shifted forever. And the silence is a blessing. The money didn't change them. It just finally allowed me to see them clearly, and to build a life where their approval is no longer my currency. The most valuable thing I won wasn't the millions. It was the clarity. It was the peace. It was the undeniable proof that the people who deserve a place in your life aren't there for what you can give them. They're there for you. And sometimes you have to test that to believe it. Have you ever had to test someone's loyalty? What did you learn? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons that might change your perspective. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by what they can give to others.